Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our program. Please welcome Derek Morgan, Executive Vice President of the Heritage Foundation.
Thank you very much. Good morning and welcome to the Heritage Foundation. We're very glad to have everybody here in our Allison Auditorium and also online, and of course, viewers of C-SPAN as well. Really, I'd like to just make some very brief remarks here before introducing my colleague and the driving force behind the report, Aaron Walsh. Then I'll come back up and we'll moderate a discussion with some of the commission members after we have a few speakers. We here at Heritage have been privileged to be able to convene and provide support for the Non-partisan Commission on China and COVID-19. We produced this handsome special report here. A year ago, when the idea of the commission came up to hold China accountable for their role in the pandemic, Heritage's president, Kevin Roberts, and I said, this is a great idea, but the only way we can do this is if it's nonpartisan, full of experts, and contains members with a wide range of political views. When COVID-19 hit the United States in early 2020, it was indiscriminate. The virus did not determine if one was a liberal or a conservative. It struck with vengeance and upended all of our lives. With that in mind, we asked Director John Ratcliffe to serve as chairman of the commission and then invited 8 Americans with extraordinary experience to join. They all accepted immediately and without hesitation, and we're grateful. In addition to John Ratcliffe, the commission includes former Senator Heidi Heitkamp, Ambassador Robert O'Brien, Matt Pottinger, John Yoo, Dr. Robert Kadlec, and here with us today, Dr. Robert Redfield, Dr. Jamie Metzl, and David Feith. The Heritage Foundation is grateful to all of you for dedicating so much time and effort to this endeavor. It has been our honor to have this distinguished group of individuals participate in what we believe will be one of the most important commissions in decades. The COVID-19 pandemic changed the world as we know it, and not for the better. For Americans, or for the rest of the world. In a society moving at the speed of light, we cannot just move on and forget what happened. There have been tens of millions of excess deaths worldwide, many right here in the United States of America. Substantial portions of the global economy shut down as the virus spread worldwide, leading to trillions in economic damages. As you'll hear shortly, the projected cost for the United States is a staggering $18 trillion with a T. Even with Joe Biden's inflation, that's a big number. It's critical the United States take the leadership role in holding the Chinese Communist Party accountable for one of the most catastrophic cover-ups in human history. It has been nearly 5 years since the outbreak in Wuhan, China, and nothing has been done to hold China accountable. They believe they've gotten away with it. But inaction incentivizes the CCP to persist in secretive, aggressive, and dangerous behavior. The commission has worked diligently over the past 8 months to produce a report with actionable recommendations for the president and legislative branch of government to implement right now. This commission report released today brings into focus the facts and a blueprint to begin. So I'd like to ask you to please welcome Aaron Walsh to introduce our first guest, Congressman Brad Winstrup, who's done an incredible job as chair of the House Select Subcommittee on the coronavirus pandemic. Aaron?
Thank you, Derek, and thank you all for being here today. It's a real honor to be present and to launch this paper that I think is so important. Our first guest today is Congressman Winstrup, who's really done an amazing job so far with his hearings, just really unprecedented in holding the United States for their role, what we have done, and how we've looked inside at home first, and then prepared to go after the CCP for their role in COVID-19. Congressman Winstrup was elected in 2012 to represent the people of Ohio's 2nd District. He brings experience as a doctor, Army Reserve officer, Iraq War veteran, and small business owner to help Congress tackle the economic and security challenges facing the nation. In the 118th Congress, Congressman Winstrup served on the House Ways and Means Committee, as well as the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. He also serves as chairman of the Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Pandemic. Previously, Congressman Winstrup spent 6 years on the Armed Services Committee and the Committee on Veterans Affairs. As a member of the Ways and Means Committee and Intelligence Committees, the Congressman is working to address the national health and systematic poverty issues here in the United States while strengthening our national security. He has long been a voice of support for Southern Ohio's veteran community. He also serves as a co-chair of the GOP Doctors Caucus. A Cincinnati native, Congressman Winstrup graduated from St. Xavier High School and the University of Cincinnati. He went on to earn a medical degree in Chicago as a podiatric physician, Congressman. And after completing his surgical residency, he established private practice in Cincinnati, treating patients for 26 years. Congressman Winstrup served in U.S. Army Reserve from 1998 to 2022, retiring with the rank of colonel. In 2005 to 2006, he served a tour in Iraq as a combat surgeon and was awarded a Bronze Star and Combat Action Badge for his service. In 2018, Colonel Winstrup was awarded the Soldier's Medal for heroism. During his time in Congress, Congressman Winstrup fulfilled his reserve duties by serving as the medical policy advisor for the Chief of the Army Reserve, as well as seeing patients at Walter Reed Military Medical Center in Bethesda. Congressman has a wife, Monica. They reside in Southern Ohio with their 2 children. Welcome, Congressman.
Well, thank you very much for that kind introduction, and I'm really thrilled to be here, and I'm thrilled with the work that has taken place here at Heritage, and I also want to say that I agree with you. The way to do this is in a non-partisan fashion, and I'm glad that it's been conducted that way. I can tell you, between me as chairman and my staff, a staff that works very diligently, we don't mention political party when we've been doing our investigation and when we've been looking for the facts of what took place. And I'm happy to say that some of the people you're going to hear from today have been in front of our committee, and I'm grateful to them for their willingness to come in and work with us. There has been so much to do with this, but it's been very interesting because if I go back to April of 2023, the Chinese embassy sent me a letter. They were reaching out to me to express their grave concern regarding the COVID-19 origins hearing and said that they firmly oppose it. But as you might imagine, we went ahead anyway. They said that this should be done by science and scientists and that the issue was basically settled. I pointed out that we had 7 physicians on our panel from both sides of the aisle. We're having scientists come in and talk to us in our hearing, including the authors of Proximal Origins, who wrote that it likely came from nature. So we've been broad spread as much as we possibly can, but we've also uncovered a lot of evidence when it comes to China. Everything we found would suggest that the CCP was preventing a transparent and objective investigation into the origins of COVID. They even prevented independent researchers from the WHO from visiting China. They suppressed information to hide their involvement, and they continue to hide information that would reveal missing links in the COVID origin story. It would really help if we had sequences, samples, lab books. Those are the things that we should be able to get and don't have. So when I took over, we were aware of 4 unusual things that we had already discovered relating to China. According to the State Department fact sheet, they had researchers that became sick with COVID-like symptoms in 2019, and that they deleted important sequences. They changed control of the lab at the Wuhan Institute of Virology from civilian to military, which is highly unusual. And they had a contractor reworking their ventilation system in their lab, which tells us something. We've had some success in revealing a lot of facts behind the scenes, if you will. And Dr. Peter Daszak, who was before us with a transcribed interview and then with an open hearing, And then we looked into his emails and Gmails. And as a result of our findings, NIH has now debarred EcoHealth Alliance from ever getting any funding. And remember, they were the ones doing gain-of-function type research in Wuhan on our taxpayer dollars. And Dr. Daszak himself has been debarred. I think those are important things to understand. I will say that this spring, our team received classified State Department documents, and they were heavily redacted, basically completely redacted when we first got them. But what we did see were the headlines of each section, and I want to share those with you, and I think it's important that you hear this before you hear from the panel today. The headlines were, "Initial outbreak could have been contained in China if Beijing had not covered it up." Next section, President Xi lied to obfuscate his role in the cover-up. Next section, PLA contractor involved in the construction of the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Next section, PLA presence at WIV, with Wuhan Institute of Virology, continued after construction completed. And lastly, cyber evidence of PLA shadow labs at the Wuhan Institute of Virology and Bioengineering University. China has been interested in coronavirus as a possible bioweapon for many years, and it's been reported as far back as 2005 that they had this interest. So unfortunately, because of China's cover-up, we'll never know with 100% certainty what actually took place. As Dr. Redfield said at one time, it's going to take the intelligence community to figure this out because China is not going to be cooperative. But several of the agencies have leaned towards lab leak and leaned more and more heavily, and I think you may even see that change some more for other agencies as they become more aware of some of the things that were out there. Look, I want to just say I'm really grateful to be here today and to be part of this, and I want to thank everyone for the kind words of the work that our committee's doing, but it isn't just us, because a lot of our work is driven by the work of others, and what we see taking place puts us in the right direction, I think, all the time. So I'm very grateful for that, and I just want to say that we've got to do things to make sure that we have the ability to react to any such thing, whether it is from nature or from a lab. And then we have to defend the United States of America. And if we can be of help to other nations, that's great. Because an organization, unfortunately, like the WHO, is not able to hold a country like China accountable. So we have a lot to do, a lot yet to do. But again, I'm grateful to be here today with this outstanding group of scientists, physicians, that can shed some light on a lot of things, and I'm grateful to Heritage for putting this together and for the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Winstrup. That was wonderful. I'm really proud to have the opportunity to introduce to you the 6th Director of National Intelligence. He is also the chair of our commission, John Ratcliffe. And of all the people I've ever worked for and with, he's really one of the finest human beings. I'm not reading that on his biography. I'm telling you that from experience. He's been an incredible leader of this commission, and the work that he's done, the balance that he has, everything he's always saying, let's continue to stick together on this. We need to work in a bipartisan fashion. I want to hear what everybody is saying. And it's really taught me a lot about what bipartisanship is and how we can get things done that are so important for the United States, and that is holding China accountable for COVID-19. As the 6th United States Director of National Intelligence, John Ratcliffe serves as the principal intelligence advisor to President Donald Trump and as the leader of the U.S. intelligence community, comprised of 18 federal agencies, including the CIA, National Security Agency, and intelligence elements within the Departments of Defense, State, Justice, Treasury, Commerce, Energy, and Homeland Security. As America's spy chief, Director Ratcliffe directed U.S. intelligence and counterintelligence collections platforms, covert and clandestine action programs, and analytic enterprises through both the National Intelligence Program and Military Intelligence Program, with a combined $85 billion annual budget and a workforce of more than 200,000 employees worldwide. During his tenure, Director Ratcliffe successfully deployed covert and clandestine intelligence assets to remove numerous designed terrorist leaders from the battlefield, led a shift in IC priorities to better position the United States for success in the great power competition with China, including increasing China-focused IC spending by 20%, and as a member of the National Space Council, made the historic decision to add the U.S. Space Force as the 18th member of the intelligence community, thereby elevating the space as a priority intelligence domain. On December 22, 2020, in recognition of his national security achievements as both the Director of National Intelligence and previously as a member of Congress, the President awarded Director Ratcliffe the National Security Medal, the nation's highest honor for distinguished achievement in the field of intelligence and national security. In addition, the Secretary of Defense also awarded Director Ratcliffe the Department of Defense Distinguished Public Service Medal for playing an integral role in multiple special operations success and empowering the Secretary of Defense to make fully informed decisions to remove terrorists from the battlefield and keep the United States forces and American people safe. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to the Commissioner.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here with all of you today. Aaron, thank you so much for the overly kind introduction. I want to start with just a couple of quick thank yous so we can get into a panel discussion about what's really important. And I want to start with my good friend, Dr. Brad Winstrup. Of all the nice things that Aaron related about him, she left out the fact that I think it was 6 years ago when you and I served together in Congress, when members of Congress were attacked on a ball field here in Washington, D.C., Dr. Winstrup saved the life of our mutual friend, Majority Leader Steve Scalise, something for which we should all be eternally grateful. Beyond that, I just want to echo the comments that have been made about the tremendous work that you have done, Dr. Winstrup, as the chairman of the Select Subcommittee on COVID-19. We're very fortunate that, as Aaron said, you're willing to focus on these issues. We're lucky to live in a country where we have a government that's accountable to the people. In China, there is no accountability. There is no looking back. There are no oversight committees. We are all grateful for the work that you have done and that you will continue to do. And it was an honor and a privilege to serve with you in Congress and in this capacity as well. I also want to thank everyone here at Heritage. Kevin Roberts, of course. Derek, thank you for being here and moderating today. Aaron, thank you so much for everything and for the kind words and remarks. And most importantly, thank you to everyone at Heritage for asking me and giving me the honor to chair this incredible commission. Derek already went through all the names of the people that are involved, of our 9 commissioners. But I want to pause and have you take note. This is the most esteemed group that I can possibly be associated with or work with. If you looked at it, these are the most distinguished, recognized, and respected officials, most respected scientists, doctors, most respected diplomats and elected officials, most respected national security and intelligence officials. And we come from all angles and all walks of life, and we come from all parties and all backgrounds. And as has been expressed, to work in a bipartisan manner, to come up with nonpartisan findings and conclusions and recommendations is really just extraordinary work and extraordinary achievement. The other thing that I want to point out is that as we came together to do this very important work, we did so to look objectively at the role that China played here. And the reason I say that is, and really to underscore that point, our findings, our conclusions, the damages, the assessment, all of that is agnostic to the issue of whether or not COVID-19 was a result of a natural spillover of zoonotic origins, or whether it was a result of a research-related lab incident. There's been so much discussion, and rightfully so, about the origins of COVID. And I will say, we address it in our report, and all 9 of us, both parties, unanimously, without dissent, we are all of the opinion that the most likely, the most probable origin was a research-related incident. But we were also really want to stress and focus that the damages that are assessed, the case that is made, the recommendations that are forthcoming, it doesn't matter what the origins were. What matters were, at the point in time that the People's Republic of China and its leadership and its leaders within the Chinese Communist Party became aware of this virus, of this outbreak, regardless of the origins of it, the actions that they took. And we looked and have compiled and collated and coordinated from open source and frankly from our own personal knowledge. You know, everyone involved in this commission served in the United States government. Some of us served during this period of time. And so we bring unique perspectives, and some of us had access to intelligence and information that isn't publicly available, but also can serve as the basis of some of the recommendations that are included in here. And we are united, we are unanimous in this report and its findings that are based upon the fact that, as has been said, at the point that the People's Republic of China, its government and its leadership became aware of the outbreak of this virus, they took actions that were frankly inexcusable and for which they should be accountable. As Dr. Winstrup said, to destroy samples, to hide evidence, to jail journalists, to silence scientists, to obfuscate, to refuse to participate in an open and honest investigation, which they're obligated to do under the treaties that they've signed and the World Health Organization, of which they're a part of. For all of those reasons, it was important for us to undertake this case, to lay it out, and then to talk about the potential legal remedies that are available, which we have done. You know, under the Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act, there are challenges, but we talk about how within this report there are legal avenues and remedies and exceptions under that that we think can be pursued. But we also think that Congress could be helpful in further clarifying and moving forward with legislation to make it clear that if there were another pandemic, that we wouldn't have these issues about immunity that China would likely assert. We also talk about recommendations to the President of the United States, to members of Congress, and to the American people. Again, we did so in a nonpartisan way, in a way that we think reflects what's most important about the findings that we include in here, and that's this. We've all survived the worst, obviously the worst pandemic of our lifetime, but it would be a mistake for all of us to assume that it will be the last one. And the best way to ensure that there is not another one is for our government and other governments to use what we have laid forth as a blueprint for accountability from China and an ability to hopefully prevent anything like this from happening again in our lifetime. Again, my honor and privilege to serve with this group of people, and again, grateful to Heritage for the opportunity to do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. This is a person whose bio is so long that I'm actually not going to read the whole thing. If you want to learn more about him, you should go to Amazon.com and buy his new book, Superconvergence. Anyway, Jamie Metzl is one of the most amazing people who has served on this commission. He has been working with us hand in hand tirelessly the entire time. He is a former Clinton official in the National Security Council. He has testified a number of times before Congress. He is the author of about 6 books, and he is a triathlete, a marathon man. He's run like 42 of each of those. And every time he called me, he was always, "What are you doing?" "I'm in a marathon. I'm getting ready to jump in the pool. I'm swimming." Anyway, he's bionic. But one thing that he's brought to this is incredible energy. And I think and hope he will tell you a little bit about what he did from the beginning of COVID and how he has worked day and night to really bring together a group of people throughout the world to help unearth a lot of these facts. So without further ado, Jamie, please come on up.
Thanks so much, Aaron, Congressman Winstrup, Chairman Ratcliffe, and all of you. It's really my great pleasure and honor to be here with all of you. Thank you to Heritage for hosting us. As Aaron said, I've worked tirelessly on the COVID-19 origin issue for 4.5 years, and I'm deeply honored to have been the lead witness in Congressman Winstrup's critically important hearings and to serve as a commissioner on this absolutely essential nonpartisan commission. We're here because every person on Earth has an absolute right to demand answers about why so many of our friends and relatives are dead and why our lives have been so massively disrupted by a totally avoidable political pandemic. Congressman Winstrup's hearings have rightly asked tough questions of many U.S. officials and actors. Our commission's report focuses on the entity we believe bears primary responsibility for the COVID-19 pandemic. While other governments, including the United States and France, may have played small contributing roles, there can be, in our view, little doubt that China's government is primarily responsible for the COVID-19 pandemic. But for the unique pathologies of the Chinese state, there very likely would have been no pandemic at all. I am a Democrat and a liberal. I don't agree with many of the positions of the Heritage Foundation. I say that with love and respect. But that is beside the point for our purposes today. We come together as Democrats, Republicans, Americans, and human beings to demand accountability for this totally avoidable crisis. The bipartisan members of our commission may not agree on everything, but we certainly stand united on this. Although we believe the preponderance of evidence, of the available evidence, leans heavily in the direction of a research-related origin in Wuhan, our assertion of Chinese state culpability would remain unchanged, even if the first shreds of evidence should miraculously appear supporting the Huanan market origins hypothesis. With 28 million people dead as a result of COVID-19 and tens of trillions of dollars in damages, it is simply unacceptable and frankly unimaginable that every stone should not be overturned examining what went wrong as an essential foundation of our efforts to build a safer future. In an ideal world, China's leaders would have taken the lead in these efforts for the good of both the people of China and all of us. Tragically, China's government has done the exact opposite. It has destroyed samples, hidden records, imprisoned Chinese citizen journalists, gagged Chinese scientists, blocked any meaningful international investigations, and cynically sandbagged the World Health Organization. Because the Chinese government has so completely abrogated its responsibilities, and because foreign governments have been unable or unwilling to hold China to account, at least so far, the responsibility has fallen to private citizens like us to demand tougher action. Our commission makes the following assertions. 1, China is primarily responsible for the COVID-19 pandemic, which led to over 28 million excess deaths globally, including over 1 million in the United States. 2, based on our calculations, the pandemic resulted in $18 trillion of losses to the United States. 3, as a means of establishing accountability and discouraging similar behavior in the future, the Chinese government and select Chinese companies must be held accountable for and liable for these losses. 4, Although America's Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act was correctly designed to protect foreign states from liability in U.S. courts, these protections do not and should not always apply in extraordinary circumstances, as was the case when Congress passed an amendment to FSIA in 2016, giving U.S. courts jurisdiction over terrorist financing cases. 5, given the magnitude of the COVID-19 crisis and China's complete disregard of international norms, human lives, transparency, and accountability, we believe that a similar and highly tailored amendment is now required. For this reason, we have proposed a single paragraph amendment to the FSIA granting U.S. federal courts jurisdiction over cases where injured American citizens are seeking monetary damages against a foreign state, where the foreign state has directly through malfeasance or indirectly through negligence sparked a global pandemic leading to more than 1 million excess deaths in the United States, and when it has failed to carry out or allow a comprehensive and unfettered investigation. This may sound legalese, but passing this amendment would be the first serious step and by far the most significant step taken by any entity anywhere toward holding China accountable for COVID-19. Although we recognize that many commissions issue reports that go nowhere, we have already begun consultations with members of Congress regarding implementing legislation for the recommendations outlined in our report, and have reason to expect significant progress over the coming months. And that's why we're so thrilled to be working so closely with Congressman Winstrup and his absolutely incredible staff. The steps we are recommending may seem aggressive, including in the context of worsening relations between the United States and China. But we have already lived through the consequences of the status quo. 28 million people are dead as a result, I'll say it again, of a totally avoidable pandemic. Enough is enough. If we do not take tough action now, future pandemics will almost certainly be far worse. 4.5 years of Chinese impunity and international impotence now come to an end. Thank you.
If I could invite the panelists to come on up to the stage, we'll get started here. Either one's good.
Good job. Thanks, sir. Thank you.
All right. Well, those were excellent remarks. A lot of different perspectives there. I want to start, Dr. Redfield, with you. It's been almost 5 years since the pandemic hit the U.S., and you were head of the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta at the time. Could you just set the scene for us at New Year's Eve 2020, kind of what was going on?
Well, for me, it was a special time because it was the first time ever that I had all 21 of my family, all my kids, their spouses, my grandkids all together in Western Maryland. And I got a call from my colleagues in Beijing. We have an office, CDC, we did in Beijing, that there was 27 cases of a new respiratory illness. It was not flu and it was not SARS. And so I then called my counterpart, the head of the Chinese CDC, George Gao, and I asked George if he could give me an update, and he said, yes, they do have 27 cases of unexplained respiratory illness that wasn't flu and wasn't SARS, and they all came from the wet market. And this is important because this is the beginning of setting what I call the roost. So I asked George, well, what was your case definition? And George said, Bob, it was people that had an unspecified pneumonia that wasn't flu and SARS that came from the wet market. I said, well, George, by definition, then everybody came from the wet market because that was your case definition. What you need to do is go outside the wet market and look for people with unspecified pneumonia that's not flu or SARS in Wuhan. About 2 days later, he called me back and he said, Bob, we have hundreds of cases and it has nothing to do with the wet market. And I think that's important because there was a group of people that wanted us, and we all kind of made the mistake when we called this SARS-like. COVID-19 is nothing like SARS. SARS came from a bat to an intermediate animal, then to humans, and then same with MERS, bat to an intermediate animal and humans. So they were setting up this spillover scenario. But the reality is we now know that COVID-19 began in the Wuhan area, probably somewhere between August and October of 2019, where the cases began to appear. So it really had nothing to do with the proximal origin paper. That's totally, it's really a paper that should be retracted. It had nothing to do with the wet market. The other thing I'll just say for people's reference points, because as a virologist, I've always felt that the origin of this virus was gain-of-function research, laboratory action. And why did I think that as a virologist? When a virus goes from an animal into humans, it takes a long time for that virus to learn how to efficiently transmit human to human. You're kind of witnessing that today when you look at the bird flu epidemic that we're seeing now in dairy farms. We just had the fourth cattle dairy farmer worker infected. But that virus doesn't know how to go human to human right now. But when COVID came, it immediately was one of the most infectious viruses that I've seen as a clinical virologist, probably behind measles. Somehow this virus was educated to know how to infect humans. And we now know that there were papers published by that lab in 2014, 2015, where they acknowledged they successfully had learned how to teach the COVID virus, the coronavirus they were working with, how to infect human tissue. And I think the last thing I'll say on this is it should strike people, and this is what I get upset about some of my advocates for spillover. If you ask the question today about COVID-19, highly efficiently transmitted among humans, do you know that virus hardly can transmit itself among bats anymore? It knows how to infect humans. It doesn't really know how to infect bats. And I think that's because it was engineered to infect humans, and in engineering it to infect humans, it lost its ability to infect bats.
Let me follow up with you. So do you believe that this was preventable? What steps should China have taken, at the outset to mitigate the crisis?
Yeah, I think what Jamie said is very important. This was a totally preventable pandemic, one of great cost, 28 million lives, trillions and trillions of dollars. People know, and I wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, that I'm a very strong advocate for a moratorium on gain-of-function research. I'm very concerned about the next pandemic. I think the next pandemic will be a bird flu pandemic. But right now, the bird flu doesn't know how to get into humans efficiently. You've seen, we just had the fifth case in the United States, 4 dairy workers and 1 chicken farmer worker, but it doesn't know how to go human to human. It can go animal to human, and then that's it. But eventually, these viruses can learn. Right now, the bird flu is in 27 different mammals in the United States, learning how to infect different mammals. We just want it to stay out of the human. But this virus, the COVID virus, really learned how to infect humans very quickly. And I think it was a direct consequence of scientists. I've used this term before. It's a direct consequence of scientific arrogance, where the scientists that were working on this were intentionally teaching this virus how to infect humans, never recognizing that something would ever go wrong. And in fact, unfortunately, this virus did escape, I think, not intentionally, probably in the fall of 2019, and the rest is history. The other reason it's preventable, and this is part of what Director Ratcliffe alluded to in holding China accountable, we now know with a high degree of certainty that the Chinese understood that they had a new pandemic in probably August, September of 2019. Unfortunately, they didn't tell the world, right? But they knew this epidemic was starting. And as Director Ratcliffe alluded to, in September of 2019, the Wuhan lab did 3 things. It changed the leadership from the civilian leadership to the military leadership. Why did they do that? That's highly unusual. The second thing they did, which is really unusual, and Jesse can allude to this too as a researcher, is they deleted their entire research records of all the sequences of every coronavirus they'd ever sequenced for over a decade. Researchers don't usually do that. And the third thing that I think is most telling about my theory that this was an accidental lab leak that then went throughout the city was they put a contract in to redo the ventilation system of that laboratory. And I think it really suggests that they had a major issue. So they could have warned the world in probably August, September of 2019. Instead, they came up with what I view as a ruse, that this was a new pandemic that somehow came out of the wet market in Wuhan in December, late December of 2019.
Thank you for that explanation. David, you were Deputy Secretary at the time. Dr. Redfield just said he thought it was preventable. Can you tell us, maybe add to what Dr. Redfield said about what China did in those early months about covering it up?
Sure. You know, it's commonly said, it's been said for years, and amazingly enough, it's still said sometimes today, that public health is an obvious area of cooperation that Washington and Beijing can pursue together. And you know, as U.S.-China relations have grown so much more tense in recent years, as there have been arguments for the United States and our allies to take a fundamentally more defensive and suspicious and pessimistic and competitive posture toward China and toward the Chinese Communist Party, this argument that there are opportunities still to cooperate in major areas with China persists. And those major areas are sometimes cited to include, say, climate and environmental issues and public health issues in an absolutely priority way. Well, unfortunately, we've run this experiment for many years in many different ways, most significantly and catastrophically in the COVID-19 experience. And as COVID was emerging publicly, first in Wuhan and then in China and then around the world in late 2019 and early 2020, the Chinese authorities demonstrated that they are entirely unwilling to be a transparent partner of the United States or really of anyone else around the world in public health cooperation in areas that were of, at that time, acute and immediate public health need for saving lives, or in a way that was consistent with the obligations of China under its World Health Organization agreements, the international health regulations, and otherwise. And so what we saw beginning in the first days of January, when we in the State Department and elsewhere in the U.S. government first became aware that there was a novel virus breaking out in China, was that the Chinese authorities had already begun in December to silence and to disappear doctors and journalists and others who were trying to bring to light what was happening in Wuhan. The Chinese authorities had begun already in December to systematically suppress evidence. Congressman Winstrup and others have mentioned the lack of early samples and sequences to this day from that period because of the immediate and aggressive cover-up that begun, that included the systematic suppression of evidence from hospitals, from genomic companies in China that had sequenced the data, and from other laboratories in China. In early January, I think it was the 11th of January, the first Chinese lab that actually published the sequence online did so in violation of Chinese state policy, and that lab in Shanghai was shuttered the very next day for what the Chinese Communist Party, in its characteristic way, calls rectification. And that had begun immediately, as the virus began to spread. You also had a long-held denial of human-to-human transmission by the Chinese authorities. Again, depending how you want to count it, some of that goes back, into the early autumn of 2019, because the Chinese authorities, had they been more transparent and more faithful to their international obligations. They would have begun to share information. They didn't do so. They persisted after there was already clearly an epidemic and a pandemic here to deny human-to-human transmission until fairly deep into January of 2020 with really damaging consequences. The Chinese authorities also systematically endangered other countries. They were calling foreign diplomats in Beijing to the carpet to tell them not to put travel restrictions up. They did this to the United States. They did this to others in Europe. And you saw essentially a series of sort of games with the nature of the travel restrictions in China and the pressure on others not to impose travel restrictions on China, which would have, if imposed earlier, slowed and reduced the spread. And all of this together, constituted a real assault on international transparency. Again, on the formal, like World Health Organization, and the informal, just sort of international public health cooperation obligations of any government acting in good faith. But the Chinese Communist Party is not structured to act that way. As I think Jamie put it nicely a moment ago, there are unique pathologies of the Chinese communist system that contributed enormously to the COVID catastrophe that we all lived through. And the systems that we have in our government and around the world need to be a lot better prepared for this kind of pathological response out of the Chinese communist system, frankly, better prepared than we were. And we should have expected a greater degree of obfuscation, cover-up, and dishonesty than we were actually postured for at the time. But fundamentally, the responsibility is on the Chinese Communist Party here. And unfortunately, this whole litany of silencing and disappearing and non-transparency and coercion and cover-up has effectively gone unanswered now for more than 4 years, making, I think, the recommendations of this commission especially important and urgent.
We've got one eye on the clock because we want to get to audience questions. Let's keep a few minutes for that, but quick follow-up for you and then a couple other quick questions. So the report has recommendations on how to hold China accountable and also how to prevent the next pandemic, but I want you to zero in just on one specific measure, which would be U.S. government funding for research and what kind of strict measures could be put in place. And Dr. Redfield just mentioned that as well.
Sure. Well, one especially important recommendation that we do put forward is that the U.S. government, and this could be done through the Congress, and the executive branch in various ways, that the U.S. government perform an audit on all U.S. government-funded biomedical and related research in China, research funding of the U.S. government of biomedical and related research in China, and that this audit place a strict one-year deadline, establishing a presumption that this research, because of the nature of the Chinese political system, is going to be non-transparent and unsafe and a net negative for international scientific cooperation unless the relevant implementers and funders of that research can rebut the presumption and demonstrate that actually, because of particular circumstances, a particular project is still overwhelmingly in the public interest, despite the demonstrated enormous risks of undertaking sensitive and dangerous research in an environment like China. And this is a recognition that would be long overdue that the US government and others around the world have been funding and have had a broad science and technology exchange relationship with China that has just underappreciated the risks of the non-transparency and the coercion. So it would establish essentially an audit and a rebuttable presumption that would hopefully have a very dramatic effect in cutting down on research cooperation with China that, frankly, the US government and US universities and also US corporations, we might say, have shown over the years a real inability to properly monitor.
Great. Jamie, I want to go to you next. So for 4.5 years or so, you've been calling for the National COVID-19 Commission. Can you explain kind of how that would work and the importance for doing that?
Sure. So more than two decades ago, we experienced 9/11. At that time, we realized that we weren't prepared for this kind of shock, and it would, in retrospect, had we been better organized, we would have prevented it. And so we had a bipartisan group of high-level people who came together in the spirit of the national interest and said, what do we need to do differently going forward? They made a series of recommendations. I'm here with my friend John, and one was that we had to bring together our intelligence communities, and that's why the ODNI was created in the first place. As I said in my remarks, COVID-19 was a systems failure, primarily in China, but in our response, we failed. There were many things that could have happened differently. And it is just insane, in my view, that we're now 4.5 years on and we don't have a bipartisan 9/11 style commission to bring everything together to do the kind of work that Congressman Winstrup and others have done to try to learn these lessons, but do it in a consolidated national way, make recommendations to the president, to the people of the United States about the best ways forward. And so it would have been better had this happened 4 years ago, but every moment that we don't learn the lessons of this failure, we are in danger. And so what we would do is it would look at the origins, it would look at the responses, and certainly everybody, the United States had big failures, many countries had big failures, and then it would look at what are the kinds of reforms that are required in the United States and internationally and globally to build the safest possible world, because we are entering an age of synthetic biology where we can easily imagine pathogens far scarier than the SARS-CoV-2 virus. Bob just mentioned some of those. So as scary as bird flu is now, it is easy to imagine people in laboratories around the world saying, hey, what can we do, not even with genome editing, with serial passaging, to just push an evolutionary process like was done in 2011 lab experiments to make this more easily, this virus, better able to infect humans. And I don't want to be back here X years from now saying we wasted the opportunity, quote unquote, of COVID-19. We didn't learn the lessons. We didn't make the reforms that are required. And that's why, as a matter of urgency, we need a 9/11 style bipartisan national commission.
Thank you for that, Jamie. And Director Ratcliffe, last question for you before we get to audience questions. So I'm sure there's a lot of things you can't talk to us about publicly, but can you share with us your insight as to why the intelligence community has not been able to determine, the origins of COVID-19, even though I guess it was FBI and DOE came out in February of 2023 and changed their assessment?
Well, I want to first augment what Jamie said about a bipartisan national commission. Mm-hmm. The importance of it, probably the biggest, most important recommendation that we made. And we talked about this, credit to Heritage for allowing us to do this. But it's important. We want this to be a blueprint that has the backing, the endorsement, the legitimacy of the United States government taking what we've done as a blueprint and creating that commission. And we also want other countries to look at what we've done and to use this as a blueprint to make their own damage calculations and assessment. We think that's the best way to hold China accountable moving forward. Derek, to your question about the intelligence community, the way you phrased that was, why aren't we able? It's not a question of being able, it's a question of willing to do. Because as you point out, FBI has been willing to do that. DOE, which by the way has the largest contingent of scientists of any intelligence component within our intelligence community, has done that. So I start with 6 days before I became DNI, the intelligence community did put out a statement saying that they agreed with the consensus of the scientific community that this was naturally occurring. People find it interesting. When I came into the office a few days later in the midst of this global pandemic, I said, okay, great. show me the intelligence that supports that. And you know, the vast preponderance of it said exactly the opposite, said exactly what we've concluded, is that the most likely, you know, all of the intelligence that we had, circumstantial though it may be, pointed towards this being a research-related incident, not naturally occurring. To be honest, I mean, the CIA is the most exquisite intelligence agency and enterprise, I think, anywhere in the world. And the notion that some 4.5 years later, it's not capable of making an assessment with some degree of confidence, even if it were low or moderate confidence, I frankly would have a high degree of confidence, I think is really, I think reflects that there are political considerations and financial considerations, you know, that have prevented that, but that's not a good reason not to be honest and forthright with the American people and with the rest of the world. So I'm convinced that eventually the entire intelligence community will agree with FBI and with DOE, and there will be a unanimous assessment that it was as a result of a research-related incident. And I think efforts like this will help bring about that sooner.
Okay, we're racing against the clock here. So what I want to do is take 2 questions. We'll just take the questions one after the other, and then anybody can jump in on those and kind of sum up your thoughts as well. So I see a hand here and a hand here. So if we can get, sure.
Thank you. All right, thank you. So this is Daniel
Take it
from.
short.
Hi there. Yes,
Yeah.
This is Daniel from Freeware Investment. Nice topic here. I came from Hong Kong. During the COVID pandemic, it's right after the Hong Kong protests, and we have been doing a lot of advocacy work. I've been telling like both the American government and the U.S. committee saying that, hey, Chinese government is a big fat liar. They did the same thing to us in 2003 about SARS. They've been covering all those viruses, not going to tell the WHO what's going on. And what's even worse right now over COVID-19, they've been telling their own people in China that United States is the origin for COVID-19. It was made from a U.S. Army base. It's a big fat lie. But my big question is that because I'm in finance right now, I'm looking at the human rights investment, ethical investing. I'm saying that actually the U.S. private sector is also a part of the blame here. You know, during the COVID-19, China is the biggest PPE supplier. And as a Hong Kong activist at the time, we were trying to look for source to buy the mass distribute across the U.S. medical workers and hospital here. That's one of the
Okay,
campaign.
I'm going to stop you there. I think we got most of the question. I want to get one more in. Over here. Right here is fine. Yeah, right there.
Can you say some more about Peter Daszak and Diffuse and what the possibility that it was U.S. IP, intellectual property that was used and that it should never should have gone there? And I went to the hearing in Congress where Daszak testified, and he was harassing a reporter. He had a film crew that was filming Emily Kopp, K-O-P-P, like getting in her face.
Okay.
And
all right, great. I want to give everybody time to answer. So we'll just start here and go down, take one or both of those questions, and any summary you want to make.
Well, I'll just jump in on
Sure.
the issue about China not being honest. It certainly cuts across a lot of different issues. I think one of the things that's important here is we're at a point in time where, unfortunately, no American president has yet confronted President Xi with China's actions, and I think it's not too late to do that. I think diplomatically, but unequivocally, and in a very direct, forthright manner, that needs to take place. There needs to be a discussion directly with the leader of the People's Republic of China that says that the United States is aware of their conduct, direct in how nefarious and sinister it is, and that there has to be accountability for that, going back and going forward.
Yeah. So just very quickly, China's response to SARS-1 20 years ago was abysmal. China's response to SARS-2 20 years later, in spite of all of these international processes, was even worse. And the reason that was the case is that there was no accountability for all of the obfuscation in the first case. If we follow this same model, there'll be the next scenario, and it will be even worse. That's why accountability, transparency are so important now. For your question, so I've been deeply involved in the issue of Chinese CRISPR babies. And so the CRISPR babies were born in China in 2018. it was the tools of CRISPR-Cas9 genome editing, which was funded by the US National Institutes of Health. We have a system of open science, and that's why there is continuous technology transfer. There was a small amount of NIH funding that went through Peter Daszak to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Congressman Winstrup has done it, and his team. I want to recognize Mitch, who's over here, have done a phenomenal job digging into that, and it's really important. But we live in a world of open science where there's a lot of transfer of knowledge and capability, and we have an interest in collaborating with China in all sorts of areas on cancer care and agriculture and all of these other things. But as David said, if we are blind to the risks, if we don't recognize that we need national security screens for these investments, if we don't recognize that the NIH did not have sufficient oversight, not transparency to these investments, even though they were relatively small, we will play contributing roles in building the kinds of monsters that we are trying to defend. And that's why we need to think a lot differently about our collaborations with China across the board, and our recommendations, we believe, are an important step in that direction.
And your point is an important one that looks at that diffuse protocol proposal, because that was a research proposal that really said that they were going to intentionally insert what we call a furin cleavage site into this COVID virus. And why is that important? Is that cleavage site changes the orientation of the virus's binding domain for the host receptor. So now it makes it, normally without that furin cleavage site, that binding domain can attach very well to the bat receptor. But when you put the furin cleavage site, it no longer can attach to the bat receptor well. But now it can attach to the human receptor, all right? And it's very interesting. If you study that carefully, it's basically 12 nucleotides that they've put in there. And it's important as another observation is that those nucleotides, 3 of them code for an amino acid. So if you have 12, you have 4 amino acids. The nucleotide sequence that's used with the COVID virus, the nucleotide triplet for arginine is the preferred triplet not used by bats for arginine, but it's the preferred triplet for humans. All right, so I think it shows clear evidence of engineering. And you asked the last question, was US technology used to it? Absolutely. The scientists in North Carolina had developed techniques that they could actually accomplish this with no signature. So now I can do this, but you can't tell I did this. And we know they shared that technology with the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
And then just very quickly, I would add, I think the question on PPE and resilience, where we stand now 4.5 years later, we are nowhere near where we need to be on having PPE supply chains that are resilient, not dependent on China. The same is true with pharmaceutical supplies, where we have enormous dependence on China that has not improved at all, despite the last 4.5 years, amazingly enough. And the same is true on a wide range of scientific research in the government, academic, and commercial sectors. One recommendation that we do point to in our report involves the pending Biosecure Act, which has bipartisan support but hasn't yet passed out of the House or Senate. That would begin a narrow decoupling of US government contractor pharmaceutical and biotech companies from certain identified Chinese providers of biopharmaceutical services. That's just a beginning effort that points to a very wide and diverse range of relationships across the government and business worlds of biotech and pharma, where we have relationships with China that are worthy of reconsideration.
Well, regrettably, we've run out of time, but I do encourage you to pick up 64-page report, more than 220 footnotes, very thoroughly researched. And please join me in thanking our panelists for this great discussion.